Dear listener, there are names in the Quran that carry immediate weight, not because they are described in detail, but because of what surrounds them: mystery, scale, inevitability. Yajuj and Majuj are among those names. They are not myths borrowed from folklore. They are not symbolic metaphors. They are mentioned explicitly in Revelation, tied to events that have not yet unfolded fully. And when the Quran speaks of them, it does so with seriousness. In Surah Al-Kahf and Surah Al-Anbiya, their presence appears briefly, yet powerfully. They are described as a people capable of corruption on a massive scale, not isolated troublemakers, not small tribes limited in reach, but a force whose emergence will mark a significant phase of human history. The Quran does not dwell on their appearance or speculate about their culture. It emphasizes impact. That restraint is important. Where revelation remains concise, speculation often rushes in. Throughout history, people have tried to map Yajuj and Majuj onto modern nations, ethnic groups, or political movements. But the Quran does not instruct believers to guess their identity. It instructs believers to recognize their reality. They exist, they are contained for now, and they will emerge when Allah permits. The emotional tension surrounding them comes from scale. Prophetic narrations indicate that their numbers will be overwhelming, not symbolic exaggeration, but literal magnitude. When they are finally released, their movement will resemble a flood, rapid, unstoppable, consuming. This imagery alone challenges human assumptions about control. Contrast begins to form here. Humanity builds systems, borders, alliances, and weapons, believing stability can be engineered indefinitely. Yajuj and Majuj represent a moment when those systems prove fragile, not because human effort is meaningless, but because divine decree overrides human planning. Yet fear must be balanced with understanding. The Quran does not present their existence as a constant threat haunting daily life. It presents them as part of a larger divine timeline. Their emergence is not random chaos. It is scheduled within wisdom. The verse states clearly that when the promise of Allah comes, the barrier restraining them will crumble. Hidden for now, destined for later. That hiddenness is itself a mercy. Imagine if such a force roamed freely at all times. Containment demonstrates control, and containment implies a controller. The very fact that they are restrained reveals that even the most destructive force operates within boundaries set by Allah. The question that lingers is not simply who they are, it is this: if their release is inevitable, if their numbers are overwhelming, if their spread resembles a flood, who could possibly stop them? Before that answer becomes clear, history turns back to a king, a journey, and a wall unlike any other. Long before their final emergence, there was a time when Yajuj and Majuj were already known for corruption. The Quran introduces this moment through the story of Dhul-Qarnayn, a ruler whose journeys stretched across lands and whose authority was balanced with justice. Unlike tyrants who ruled for self-glory, Dhul-Qarnayn is presented as a leader who understood that power was a trust from Allah. As he traveled, he encountered different nations and circumstances. One of those encounters brought him to a people who could barely communicate with him. They lived between two mountains and were vulnerable. Their complaint was direct. Yajuj and Majuj were causing fasad, corruption, in the land. Their harm was not minor or occasional. It was disruptive enough that an entire community sought intervention. Notice the contrast. Oppressed people seeking protection, a ruler capable of domination choosing service. Where power could have been exploited, it was instead directed toward defense. The people offered Dhul-Qarnayn payment in exchange for building a barrier between them and this destructive force. His response reveals character. He declined wealth, stating that what Allah had given him was better. He did not see leadership as a transaction. Instead, he asked for manpower. Bring me iron, bring me labor, assist me in building. What followed was not mystical enchantment, but structured engineering guided by divine facilitation. Large blocks of iron were placed between the two mountainsides. Then, molten copper was poured over them, sealing gaps and strengthening the structure. The Quran describes it as so firm that Yajuj and Majuj could neither scale it nor pierce it. This moment is critical. Human effort, combined with divine permission, produced containment. The barrier was real, solid, effective. But Dhul-Qarnayn did not attribute success to his own genius. After completing it, he said, "This is a mercy from my Lord." He recognized that ability, resources, and victory all originate from Allah. Contrast sharpens again. Yajuj and Majuj represent chaos and corruption. Dhul-Qarnayn represents order and justice. They seek breach. He builds boundaries. They spread harm. He creates protection. The barrier was not merely physical. It symbolized divine control over destructive force. Yet within that declaration of mercy came a reminder. Dhul-Qarnayn added that when the promise of his Lord comes, the barrier will be leveled. That statement transforms the entire narrative. The wall was never eternal. It was temporary containment within divine timing. Its strength depended not solely on iron and copper, but on decree. This shifts perspective. Even the strongest human construction remains subject to Allah's will. The barrier stands not because of metal alone, but because its time to fall has not yet arrived. The same Lord who enabled its construction will permit its collapse. So the king built, the people were protected, Yajuj and Majuj were restrained, but the story did not end there. The barrier's existence points toward a future moment when restraint will be lifted, and that future carries implications far greater than the past conflict that first required its construction. The story of Dhul-Qarnayn does not end with construction. It ends with a warning. After completing the barrier of iron and molten copper, he did not declare permanent victory. He said clearly, "This is a mercy from my Lord. But when the promise of my Lord comes to pass, he will level it to the ground." That single statement shifts the entire narrative from history to destiny. The wall was real. The corruption it restrained was real. But the timing of its fall belongs entirely to Allah. For centuries, people have searched for this barrier. Explorers, historians, theorists, all attempting to locate it geographically. Mountains have been proposed, regions have been mapped. But the Quran does not command believers to find it. It commands them to understand its meaning. Hiddenness itself is part of the test. The unseen remains unseen until Allah chooses otherwise. Prophetic narrations add another layer. It is reported that Yajuj and Majuj attempt to breach the barrier daily. They dig until they nearly see light, only to find it restored the next day. This cycle continues until Allah wills otherwise. One day they will say, "If Allah wills, we will return tomorrow." And when they return, they will find it as they left it, and they will break through. This detail is profound. The barrier does not weaken because iron fails. It weakens because decree changes. Human strength is never independent of divine permission. Even destruction is scheduled. Contrast becomes sharper here. Humanity often believes stability is self-maintained, that systems endure because they are engineered well. But the barrier reminds us that endurance belongs to Allah. When He wills preservation, preservation occurs. When He is released, no structure can resist. The wall still stands, not as a monument to engineering, but as evidence of containment. It stands as a boundary between eras, between hidden force and open chaos, between restraint and flood. And yet, its hidden nature protects us from obsession. Islam does not teach believers to fixate on its coordinates. It teaches them to recognize that some realities exist beyond perception. Just as angels move unseen, just as the soul itself cannot be grasped physically, the barrier's location remains concealed. What matters is certainty in its existence and certainty in its eventual fall. This is where emotional tension builds. A force capable of massive corruption is restrained somewhere beyond our sight, contained not by constant human surveillance, but by divine command. The longer it stands, the more stable the world feels. But stability is not permanence. One day, the promise will arrive. And when that moment comes, when the barrier is leveled, when restraint lifts, the world will witness something it has never seen before. The question will no longer be about location, it will be about survival. The Quran describes the moment briefly, but the weight of it is immense, until when Yajuj and Majuj are released and they surge from every elevation. The imagery is deliberate. They do not emerge slowly, they do not negotiate entry, they surge. Like water bursting through a fractured dam, their movement will be rapid, overwhelming and unstoppable by ordinary means. This is not localized conflict. It is not a regional disturbance. It is described as a flood of humanity spreading across the earth. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ indicated that their numbers will be vast beyond comparison. So vast that when they pass by a body of water, they will drink from it until those behind them say, "There was once water here." Whether literal in exact detail or indicative of scale, the message is clear. Their population will be staggering. Contrast becomes unavoidable. Nations invest in defense systems, military power, and strategic alliances. Borders are fortified. Technology advances. Yet when Yajuj and Majuj are released, none of these structures will be sufficient. Human planning will meet a force too numerous to repel. The psychological effect alone will be immense. When numbers multiply beyond control, fear spreads faster than facts. Cities will struggle to process what is happening. Leadership will confront a reality for which no policy manual exists. The systems that once felt permanent will appear fragile. But this chaos is not random. It unfolds within prophecy. It is not divine abandonment, it is divine testing. The barrier falls because its time has arrived. And when that time arrives, humanity will confront its limitations directly. Believers will not face this moment unprepared spiritually, though they will feel its severity physically. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ described that during this period, Prophet Isa ﷺ will be present. Even he, a Prophet Muhammad ﷺ of strength and miracle, will not attempt to confront Yajuj and Majuj through military engagement. Instead, believers will retreat to safety, recognizing that this is not a battle of weapons. Contrast sharpens again. Massive numbers versus human powerlessness, speed versus stability, chaos versus control. The emergence of Yajuj and Majuj exposes a truth humanity often forgets. Control is conditional. Stability is temporary. Even the strongest empires operate within boundaries set by Allah. When those boundaries shift, human effort alone cannot restore order. And yet even in the height of their surge, divine oversight remains. Their movement, their impact, their duration, all unfold under decree. They cannot exceed their appointed time. They cannot extend beyond their limit. The day the barrier breaks will be terrifying, not because Allah has lost control, but because humanity will realize how little control it truly possessed. And in that realization, the stage will be set for the only response capable of ending the flood. Not strategy, not alliance, but sincere supplication. When Yajuj and Majuj surge across the earth, the scale of their movement will make resistance futile. This is not described as a conventional war where armies line up against armies. It is described as overwhelming expansion, numbers so vast, speed so relentless, that human defense becomes meaningless. No coalition will be able to contain them. No strategy will outmaneuver them. Even Prophet Isa ﷺ, who will be present during this period, will not attempt to confront them through force. This detail alone shifts perspective. If a Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, strengthened by divine miracles, does not raise an army against them, it reveals the nature of the trial. It is not meant to be solved by human strength. Believers will retreat to higher ground, seeking refuge. The narrations describe them taking shelter, recognizing that direct confrontation is not their role. This is a profound contrast. In many crises, humanity responds with escalation, weapon against weapon, plan against plan. But here, escalation is useless. Contrast becomes clear. Human strength versus divine power, weapons versus dua, strategy versus submission. At the height of this overwhelming chaos, Isa alayhi salam and the believers will turn to Allah in supplication. No speeches, no military plans, just sincere reliance. And it is at that moment, when reliance replaces resistance, that the decree shifts. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam described that Allah will send a plague upon Yajuj and Majuj, something small, something unseen to the naked eye, worms or insects that attack their necks. Overnight, the vast multitude that flooded the earth will collapse. The unstoppable will be stopped without human intervention. This ending is deliberate. The same force that overwhelmed humanity will fall not by human genius, but by divine command. It reinforces a central truth. No matter how large the threat, it remains creation. And all creation answers to its creator. Even after their sudden destruction, the aftermath will require cleansing. The earth will carry the physical weight of what occurred. Birds will be sent to remove their bodies. Rain will purify the land. Restoration will follow devastation, again by divine orchestration. The lesson embedded here is unmistakable. Human capability has limits. No empire, no alliance, no technology can claim ultimate control. When Allah wills containment, containment stands. When He wills release, release occurs. And when He wills conclusion, even the greatest force collapses silently. Fear may define the beginning of their emergence, but relief defines its end. And that relief comes not through dominance, but through reliance. The believers who survived will understand something deeply, that survival was never about strength, but about trust. And that realization leads to the final reflection. The story of Yajuj and Majuj is not meant to feed paranoia or conspiracy. It is meant to remind humanity of who truly governs history. When stories like Yajuj and Majuj are discussed, it is easy for the mind to run towards speculation. People try to map them onto modern nations, political powers, or secret global movements. The internet amplifies theories, fear feeds imagination, but the Quran does not present Yajuj and Majuj as a puzzle to decode. It presents them as a reminder. The real question is not where they are today. It is not which map hides their barrier. The real question is this: who controls history? From the beginning of their story to its end, one truth remains constant: divine decree. They were restrained by Allah. They will be released by Allah. They will be destroyed by Allah. Not by accident, not by coincidence, not by human manipulation. Contrast defines the lesson: chaos versus control, fear versus trust, speculation versus preparation. When believers focus excessively on hidden threats, they risk losing sight of visible responsibilities. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not command his companions to search for the barrier. He commanded them to strengthen their faith. He did not encourage obsession with numbers and timelines. He encouraged remembrance, prayer, and moral discipline. Yajuj and Majuj represent scale, overwhelming scale, but their scale exists within boundaries. They cannot move before their time. They cannot extend beyond their limit. Their destruction is written before their emergence begins. This reality should produce not paranoia, but perspective. Human history often feels unpredictable. Wars erupt, economies collapse, leaders rise and fall. In such uncertainty, people crave control. Yet the narrative of Yajuj and Majuj exposes a deeper truth. Ultimate control has never belonged to humanity. Even the barrier built by Dhul-Qarnayn stood not because of iron alone, but because Allah willed it to stand. Even the flood of destruction will end, not because humanity organizes effectively, but because Allah commands it to end. So where does that leave us? Not in fear, but in responsibility. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught that preparation for trials lies in strengthening Iman, memorizing Surah Al-Kahf, guarding prayer, holding on to unity, avoiding oppression. These are not dramatic actions, but they are decisive. The story is not about monsters roaming in secret corners of the world. It is about recognizing that no force, no matter how terrifying, escapes divine authority. It is about understanding that stability and chaos both operate within Allah's wisdom. And when believers truly internalize that, fear loses its dominance. Trust replaces speculation. Preparation replaces paranoia. Yajuj and Majuj will emerge one day. They will surge across the earth and they will fall. But above their rise and above their collapse stands the same reality. Allah controls history. The real question was never who can stop them. It was always who permits them to move in the first place.